He took a lost Comanche girl the next day. Her father surrounded his house with 70 warriors. Eli Carter stood on his porch, one hand wrapped around a chipped mug of black coffee, the other resting on the butt of a rifle slung across his chest. Was early, sky still soft with dawn, but the cold already had teeth. 48 years in his bones, and he felt every one of them this morning. His land stretched quiet before him, flat and frosted. Not a soul in sight, but the crows and the cottonwoods. He didn't talk much these days. Not since Mara passed. She'd died in the spring, and the green had never come back the same since. Her favorite rocking chair still sat by the window, unmoved. The pages of her Bible left open on the kitchen table, curled with dust and time. Eli had learned to live without her voice, barely. The dogs had taken to sleeping at the foot of the bed, maybe to fill the space where her warmth used to be. Didn't expect anything to change, but that morning, it did. He saw her while checking the chicken coop, just past the fence line, near the old sycamore. She was lying half-buried in the snow, face turned to the sky, one arm crooked like she'd tried to shield herself from something that never stopped coming. She looked maybe 19, maybe younger. Barefoot, torn dress, skin the color of copper and ash, marked with bruises that didn't come from falling. For a while, Eli just stared. Not like he was seeing a ghost, more like the ghost was staring back. Then without a word he laid the rifle in the snow and lifted her, slow and careful like she might vanish if he breathed wrong. Inside, he wrapped her in Mara's old quilt, the one with the faded sunflowers, and set her by the fire. She didn't wake, just mumbled something soft, a language he hadn't heard since he was a boy riding fence posts with his grandfather, Comanche. He hadn't heard that name spoken around these parts in years. Not since the railroads came and the treaties didn't. The girl's arm was split open, raw and red from shoulder to wrist. Eli cleaned it, stitched it, said nothing, not even when she flinched. And still, she didn't speak. But her silence carried weight, like thunder on the edge of a storm. And when Eli stepped outside to dump the bloody water, he felt something shift in the air, like the prairie was holding its breath. Something was coming, and it wasn't alone. Eli sat at the edge of the bed that night, the floor creaking beneath. Him like it resented the company. He hadn't sat there in months, not since the funeral, not since the shovel slipped in his hand, and the dirt made a sound he'll never forget. He used to talk to Mara every night. Out loud. Not because he thought she could hear him, but because pretending she could was easier than believing she couldn't. But, tonight, there were no words, just the fire snapping and the wind tracing the cracks in the window pane. The girl slept in the next room, her breath shallow but steady. Eli had left the door open. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it made the house feel less empty. She reminded him of someone, not in her face, but in her quiet. Like someone who had already buried too many things. Dreams, family, maybe even her name. He saw himself in her silence. There were photographs in the hallway. Eli didn't look at them anymore. One of Mara, smiling with her hands in the dirt, holding up tomatoes from their first garden. Another of his brother in a uniform that never came back from France. And the last, a frame still turned face down, was of a boy with curly hair and crooked teeth. Ben, their son. Gone at 13. Fever took him before the doc could even find the house. After that, the world stopped spinning the same way. Eli built a fence around his land, around his heart, and waited for time to forget him. But it hadn't. Time remembered everything. So did the land. Every stump, every empty nail on the wall, every boot print gone soft with dust. He didn't know what made him go check the barn just before dawn. Habit, maybe. Or maybe something deeper, older. The kind of knowing that lives in a man's gut, below logic, below fear. He stepped outside, and the cold slapped him full in the face. The wind had shifted, and the prairie was no longer still. They were out there. Not just one, not two. Dozens. Shapes on horseback, just beyond the tree line, wrapped in hides and silence. Moonlight caught the blades of their spears like fire catching steel. 70, maybe more. And in the center, upright and unmoving, sat a man whose stare pierced the dark like it was day. A father. Eli knew it before his heart could catch up to his eyes. The girl's father, and she wasn't lost anymore. They didn't speak. Not at first. The horses stood like statues, their breath clouding in the cold, hooves quiet against the frozen earth. It was the kind of silence that made your ears ring, the kind that comes before something breaks. Eli didn't move. He stood in the doorway, shotgun across his forearm, not raised, not yet, just resting there like an old memory. He wasn't a threat. But he wasn't giving up the girl either. Not until he knew who she was, why she bled, why she ran, and why 70 men had come riding after one. The man at the front didn't blink. He wore a bone choker around his neck and feathers, braided into hair that hadn't known scissors in years. His face was carved from years of sun, wind, and war. The lines beneath his eyes ran deep, the way rivers do when they've carried too many names downstream. He dismounted slowly, deliberately, like every motion told a story. He walked alone toward the porch, no weapons drawn, but every muscle, coiled like wire. Eli stayed still. He could feel the dogs pressed against the cabin wall, low to the ground, sensing something bigger than themselves. The man stopped 10 paces away, and for a long time they just looked at each other. Two fathers, two lives cut open by grief, one holding the past, the other guarding the future. Then came the voice, not loud, not angry, just clear. It carried across the cold like a bell. "My daughter sleeps in your house." Eli's jaw tightened. He didn't nod, didn't flinch, just met the man's gaze. "She came here bleeding, and now she breathes." The Comanche warrior studied him like a hawk watching something too calm to trust. Then his eyes flicked toward the window, just a moment, but it was enough. She was awake, watching, her face half in shadow, half in firelight. Eli turned slightly, just enough for the man to see he wasn't standing between them. He was holding space. A wall, maybe, but not a cage. The warrior took a breath, and the sound was heavy with memory. "We tracked her for 2 days," he said, voice low now. "She fled a camp soaked in blood, not ours, not her doing, soldiers." He spat the word like ash, came with peace in their mouths and fire in their hands. She was taken, she escaped. The others did not. Eli felt the weight of it settle in his chest. A girl caught in the middle of a promise broken, a treaty burned, a war that never really ended. Behind him, she stepped forward, bare feet silent against old wood. She passed him without a word, moving slow but steady until she stood between the two men. Her gaze locked on her father's. There was no fear there, only pain and something stronger. Trust. She had chosen to run, but not to hide. She had chosen survival. She had chosen him. And for a long breath, nothing moved. Then the warrior stepped forward and opened his arms. She fell into them like rain on dry land, and just like that, the porch was no longer a place of war. But it Wasn't peace either. Not yet, because 70 warriors still waited in the dark. And not all of them had come only for her. The porch was empty now. The others hadn't followed the warrior up. They waited just beyond the tree line, still as shadows, watching, measuring. Eli could feel their eyes like pressure on the back of his neck. Inside, the fire had burned low, casting long shapes on the cabin walls. Eli knelt beside it, feeding it pine wood piece by piece. The girl sat across from him, her knees drawn to her chest, the blanket still around her shoulders. She hadn't spoken since her father held her. Didn't need to. Some wounds don't bleed. They settle in the bones. You carry them the way a soldier carries silence home from war. The warrior stood by the window now, arms crossed. He hadn't sat. He hadn't asked for anything. Not water, not food, not rest. Just watched. Every movement in the cabin seemed foreign to him. Small, enclosed, filled with things that rattled and creaked and hung from nails. Eli poured water into a dented tin cup and placed it on the floor between them. He didn't push it toward the man. Didn't offer it with a word. Just left it there, like a gesture carved from old-fashioned decency. The man took it without thanks, drank, set it down with quiet reverence. That was how it began. Not with words, not with apology, but with simple, human ritual. Later, Eli stepped out to check the barn again, not because he expected trouble, but because his hands needed work. They always did. Grief has a way of filling empty time, and work was the only thing he trusted to hold it back. He found the warrior already there, running his hand along the back of one of the horses. "Apache stock," the man said, voice low, without looking, at Eli. "Strong legs, good lungs." Eli gave a small nod. "Traded a mule and a saddle for her 2 winters ago." The man gave a grunt, half amusement, half judgment. "You got the better end." It was the first time Eli had heard something close to warmth in his voice. They worked in silence, side by side, brushing the horses, tending to feed, fixing a loose hinge on the stall gate. Nothing was said, but things were exchanged. Eye contact, nods, the subtle rhythm of 2 men who knew how to live without saying much. When they returned to the cabin, the girl was asleep again. This time not curled like a fist, but stretched out, open. Her hand rested lightly on the blanket. A single braid fell over her shoulder. She looked less like a fugitive, more like a daughter. The warrior pulled a small bundle from beneath his coat, rawhide wrapped and tied with leather string. He placed it on the table and unwrapped it slowly. Inside, herbs, smoked meat, something that looked like hand-woven medicine. A piece, offering not for Eli, for her. Eli stepped back, giving them space. The man knelt beside her, laid the bundle near her head like a father tucking in memory. He whispered something, soft, rhythmic, a prayer maybe, or a song. His hand didn't touch her, but it hovered, trembling, just above. When he rose, he turned to Eli, and for the first time, their eyes met without defense. There was nothing spoken, but there was an understanding, old as the earth beneath. Them he would leave by sunrise. But something had been left behind, not a threat, not a debt, something harder to name, something that might grow, slowly, into trust. The warrior and his men rode out at first light. No ceremony, no signal, just the rustle of hooves against frost-bitten grass and the slow return of open sky. Eli watched them disappear into the horizon, a long shadow trailing behind them like the tail of a storm. She stood beside him, not close, not far. Just within arm's reach. She didn't wave, didn't cry, just stared until the dust settled and the world grew quiet again. Then she turned and walked back inside, like a girl who had done this before, too many times, in too many places. Eli stayed on the porch a while longer. When he returned, she was sitting at the table, staring at a carving knife. Not with fear. Not with intent. Just studying it. The way someone studies a word in a language they're trying to relearn. He moved slowly, always slowly around her. Not out of caution, but respect. Trust wasn't a door you kicked open. It was something you built. One unspoken gesture at a time. He slid a piece of wood across the table. Light, clean, soft-grained. She looked at it, then at him. He nodded once. Carve. She picked up the knife and began. That's how it started. Not with questions, not with stories, with making. Each day she shaped something small, a feather, a fish, a curled leaf, the kind of things children used, to whittle before the world taught them to hold different weapons. Eli said nothing as she worked. He just brought fresh wood, clean blades, tea in the evenings, and over time her silence began to shift. It changed shape. Sometimes she'd hum, barely loud enough to notice, like wind through old cotton. Once, she touched the quilt on the rocking chair and whispered a single word. He didn't know it, but he felt it land in his chest like a memory that didn't belong to him. At night, she would sit by the fire and trace patterns into the ash with her finger. Symbols, maybe, stories, messages in a language that wasn't lost, just waiting for someone to see it. Eli began to leave small offerings in return, a spool of blue thread, a cedar carving of a horse, a pair of moccasins that hadn't been worn in decades, tucked away in a trunk he thought he'd never open again. He didn't tell her the story behind them, but somehow she knew. And one evening, when the sun dipped, behind the cottonwoods and turned the cabin gold, she pointed at the old rifle above the mantel. "Yours?" she asked. Her voice was rough, like gravel wet with rain. Eli looked at it, then back at her. "It was my father's," he said, slow and plain. Her head dipped once. Not quite a nod, not quite reverence. After that, they spoke a little more. Never, in sentences. Never fast, a word here, a gesture there, names of plants, names of stars. She showed him how to braid dried sage. He showed her how to repair a saddle strap. The language between them wasn't just in mouths, it was in hands, in patience, in the way people learn to trust without asking for it. And though the land outside remained hard and wide and waiting, inside the cabin something else had started growing, not loud, not fast, but real. The days grew longer, and with them the quiet grew thicker, like a fog rolling in slow and heavy. Eli felt it before he saw it, the way the birds fell silent. The wind stopped chasing the leaves. The earth seemed to hold its breath. One evening, just as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Eli spotted them, far off, dust spiraling on the horizon like the slow smoke of a dying fire. Not 70 this time. Not yet. But enough. A small band of riders, shadows moving fast and with purpose, faces masked by scarves, eyes cold and sharp. Eli's hands clenched the rail of the porch as the familiar tightening knot of dread wrapped around his chest. He glanced inside. She was there, carving still, calm, but her eyes caught the change in light, the shift in the air. "Coming," she whispered. Her voice had settled into something steadier now, like the river after a storm. Eli nodded. He grabbed. His rifle from above the mantel, the weight heavy with history. The men dismounted just beyond the tree line. Their leader, A tall figure with a jagged scar running from temple to jaw stepped forward, his boots crunching on frost. "You shelter what don't belong," the man said, voice sharp as broken glass. Eli's gaze didn't waver. "She's hurt. No one else would take her in." The leader spat to the ground, eyes flicking to the cabin. "She's a warning, and warnings come with a price." Behind him, the others shifted, hands resting near rifles and knives. The air crackled with threat. Inside, the girl stood tall beside Eli, her shoulders squared like a warrior's. She met the leader's stare without flinching. A silence stretched, thick and brittle. Then, with a movement swift and precise, the leader reached for his gun. Eli raised his rifle in answer. Shots rang out, shattering the quiet. The dogs barked, scrambling for cover. The wind whipped snow into swirling ghosts. The battle had returned. But this time, it wasn't just about survival. It was about everything they had begun to build. The sharp crack of gunfire echoed through the frozen air, but Eli didn't fire. His eyes locked with the leader's, searching for something beneath the cold menace, a flicker of reason, or a trace of mercy. Behind the leader, the others shifted, their weapons drawn, but their faces flickered with doubt. Inside the cabin, the girl's hands clenched at her sides. Her breath steady despite the chaos outside, Eli stepped forward, lowering his rifle slowly, deliberately. "This is my land," he said, voice rough with years of hard living. "And this is my home. But more than that, she's under my protection. Now!" The leader's jaw tightened, his eyes burning with fury and something else, something older, buried beneath the rage. "Protection!" he spat. "From what? From the consequences?" Eli's heart hammered. He could feel every heartbeat like a drum in the silence between words. He thought of Mara, the wife he'd buried under the cottonwoods, of Ben, the son who never grew old, of the girl who'd arrived broken but breathing. He thought of the promises he'd made, not to a stranger, but to himself. "I'm no stranger to consequences," Eli said quietly, "but I won't hand her over to a fate worse than death, not without a fight." The leader's eyes flickered toward the girl, then back to Eli. A long moment stretched between them, a moment heavy with unspoken histories, with the weight of choices that could break men or make them. Then something shifted. The leader lowered his weapon, not in surrender but in respect. "You choose your path," he said quietly, "but know this, every choice has its cost." Eli nodded, the lines in his face deepening. He looked to the girl whose eyes met his without fear. Together they stood in the fragile calm after the storm, knowing the road ahead would test them in ways neither could yet imagine. But for now, they had made their stand. And sometimes, that was enough. The morning light filtered pale through the cabin window, casting soft shadows across the worn floorboards. Eli sat at the table, the weight of last night's choice pressing deep into his bones. The leader's words echoed in his mind. Every choice has its cost. Outside, the girl moved quietly, preparing a small bundle wrapped in cloth, her fingers deft, careful. She approached Eli and placed it gently before him. Inside was a small carved token, a symbol from her people, a promise, a peace offering. She looked at him then, eyes steady and full of something unspoken. It was more than a gift. It was an acceptance. Eli reached out, tracing the edges with rough fingers, feeling the delicate craftsmanship beneath his calluses. He knew what it meant, not just a token of gratitude, but a bridge, a silent vow to respect the world she came from, to honor her past, even as they forged something new. He stood, meeting her gaze. With slow reverence, he reached into his coat and pulled out a weathered leather pouch, the one Mara had given him years ago, filled with earth from their homestead. He handed it to her. "Carry this," he said softly. "A piece of my home, wherever you go." She nodded, accepting the gift as carefully as she had given hers. Outside, the Comanche leader watched from the edge of the trees. No words passed between them, but the ritual had been made. A sacrifice, not of blood or battle, but of trust. And in that moment, beneath the vast open sky, a fragile peace settled. One built on understanding, respect, and the silent promises that sometimes speak louder than words. The days softened like warm sunlight spilling over the ridge. The cabin no longer felt like a sanctuary built of grief, but a home reborn in quiet moments and shared breath. Eli and the girl moved together through the rhythms of the land. She showed him how to read the tracks of deer in the soft soil, how to gather sage without taking too much, how to listen to the wind's secrets. He taught her how to mend fences and coax stubborn seeds into the earth. Their silence was no longer empty. It was full of trust, of stories yet untold. Neighbors in town began to whisper anew, not with suspicion, but with wonder. The quiet man who once lived in shadows now moved with a steady calm, his gaze softened by the presence beside him. One afternoon, beneath the sprawling branches of the cottonwoods, Eli watched her laugh for the first time, a clear, bright sound that seemed to fill the air like rain after drought. In that moment, the weight of the past lifted just enough to make space for hope. The scarred land outside still held dangers, still bore the marks of old battles, but inside something new was growing, a harmony born not from silence alone, but from the courage to listen, to understand. The girl braided wildflowers into her hair, her eyes reflecting the endless sky. Eli reached out, gently clasping her hand. They didn't need words, because sometimes rebirth is felt in the quiet beating of two hearts learning to trust again. And as the sun dipped low, painting the horizon with fire, the promise of a new day stretched wide, unwritten but full of possibility. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to smash that thumbs up and hit subscribe for more unforgettable, emotional, and viral true stories. We want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell us, where in the world are you watching from?